This is Chapter 6, Section 2, The Path to Victory, 1778 to 1783. So first is a chance of compromise. So the British realized that if they lost the colonies, they stood a chance of losing other territories as well in other parts of the world. So they tried basically one last ditch effort to try and compromise with the colonies and return to the pre-1763 conditions. They offered to repeal the acts and the taxes and those things. But the Patriots said no. They have it in their head now that they're fighting for independence. This is something they really want now. And plus, now they have help from France and Spain, so they feel like they might actually win it. So why do we want to go back to being controlled by Britain, even though they're saying, let's go back to the way it was before, let's all be one big happy family? They're scared, Britain might do this to them again, and they don't want to take that chance. So they say no, there will be no compromise. So the war in the South. In the late 1770s, the British wanted to move the fighting of the war to the South. They wanted to capture territory there. And the reason is because they were counting on loyalist support in the South. They knew they had a lot of loyalists there, so they felt like if they moved the war to a more southern location, they would be able to get more support and beat the colonists. So they were able to successfully capture both Georgia and South Carolina. But there was a different fate awaiting them in Yorktown, Virginia in 1781. General Washington was able to surround the British with American and French troops. And so General Cornwallis, who was the British commander, was surrounded and he had to admit defeat. And there was a little bit of drama at the surrender. Cornwallis sent an inferior officer to surrender to the French Lieutenant Rochambeau. And that's kind of a double disgrace. First of all, Cornwallis should have done the surrendering himself, not an inferior. And secondly, he should have surrendered to Washington, not the French. It's not the French's war. He should have surrendered to the Americans, the colonists. So Rochambeau would not accept Cornwallis's surrender. He said, Washington is the general. You surrender to Washington. And so when the British surrendered to, or tried to surrender to Washington, Washington had been insulted, and so he sent a representative to accept the surrender. He refused to go himself. By this point, support for this war in England was decreasing, including members of Parliament. They were not supporting the war anymore, and so they agreed now, after Yorktown, to negotiate with the Americans. And so Yorktown is the final battle of the American War for Independence. Okay, spies and traitors. Both sides in the war enlisted the help of spies to gather information about the plans of their enemy. Now, if these spies were caught, they could face a fate as bad as execution. And one of the biggest examples of a spy was Benedict Arnold. He's one of the most famous American traitors. Initially, Benedict Arnold was a great American general, and he was well liked by Washington. But he got into a lot of debt after being discharged from the military. He had an injury, so they discharged him, and he got into some debt. After that, he married a Tory, or a loyalist, and he was bitter for not getting enough credit for the work that he did in the war. And so because of all of those reasons, he began selling military plans to the British. He needed the money, plus he was bitter, so he started selling military plans to the British. He was supposedly going to help the British capture West Point, which was a fort in New York, and even capture General Washington. But the message was intercepted from his courier. A courier is someone who delivers messages. His name was John Andre. So it was intercepted from John Andre, and John Andre was then hanged by the Americans as a traitor. And Benedict Arnold, fled to England when he heard of this. And so after this, Benedict Arnold's name became synonymous with traitor. So if someone calls you a Benedict Arnold, it means you have you betrayed them in some sort of way. Okay, diplomatic triumph. So after Yorktown, like I said, the war is now officially over. Treaty negotiations took 2 years. The French and the the French and the Spanish were stalling in these negotiations. So the Americans negotiated secretly with the British, which means they're kind of breaking or ignoring their alliance with France, who had helped them immensely during this war. But the French are stalling. They're trying to get more stuff out of the British, and the Americans are just like, look, we're ready to just get this treaty signed and be done with it. So the Americans and the British signed the Treaty of Paris 1783, and it ended the American War for Independence. And in the treaty, Britain formally recognized American independence. Britain was allowed to keep Canada, even though the French had been promised Canada if they won the war. But again, the French were stalling. Americans were ready to get these negotiations out of the way and get on with their lives. And so the Americans were like, well, they're not going to get Canada because we're tired of waiting for them. So Britain got to keep Canada. America got all of the land east of the Mississippi River. So in the map on the screen, all of the land in blue was now American land. And Britain promised to evacuate all of their forts in America. In a separate treaty, known as the Treaty of Versailles, Britain made peace with both France and Spain. And in this treaty, Spain reclaimed Florida, but they did not get the Strait of Gibraltar as they had been promised by the Americans. And France gained, in this treaty, France gained a Caribbean island known as Tobago, but they did not get Canada. And so this is what North America looked like in 1783 after the war was over. The blue belongs to the Americans, the red belongs to the British, and the yellow, all of the yellow land, still belongs to the Spanish.